Hey, howdy everybody. Good to see you on Tuesday for Tuesday's solar tips. So I've got a really cool battery week going on, and I kind of extended it into really, let's call it 2 weeks. Things just kind of keep growing. It's good to see so many of you online here today. I know Tuesdays kind of started a little bit slow, but it's lunch hour, so I figured, what the heck, let's get it going. So I've got some really good content for us today to go through. And as always, questions are welcome. I only have a couple towards the end. Most of it is presentation content that I want to get through and make sure we understand about sizing the batteries and that kind of stuff. I do want to get into making sure that we're all aware that Sunday's live stream is going to be about outages and power and backup systems. We're going to go through 4 different systems that you could use to power different things depending upon what your goals are. It's hurricane season here in Florida, so it kind of seems appropriate. Last year, I spent a week without power with a little bitty tiny solar system and 100 amp hours of power. So this year, it is completely different. And I want to kind of give everyone the benefit of what I learned over that year. And so next week, or not next week, Sunday, I hope you'll join me at 4 o'clock for that, and that we can kind of go through what those solar systems are. Um, I'm going to move us on to some of the beginning content this week. If I can get everything to work here for me, I get my setup all configured, and then I can't remember how all of it operates. So today we're going to be talking about battery sizing specifically. Uh, Battery week, obviously, we had all kinds of battery content on Sunday. We've had videos released. We've had 24-volt batteries come out. I've got some 48-volt battery stuff coming out. We've had all kinds of contents about state of charge. We've had content about um, just all kinds of battery stuff going on. And it's just been a lot of fun doing all the different battery content. But today, specifically, I want to talk about battery sizing. And I want to give you a couple of real life scenarios about it. And then I also want to make sure that you understand how to do that calculation yourself so that you can use that. And then you've always got me around if you have some questions and you need a little help there. Uh, so let's just jump right to it and get into some of the real content here. So the first piece of this, and I'm trying to pull up a chat screen on my side, so if anything comes through that I don't miss it. And I won't promise that I won't miss it, but at least I'm more likely to catch it this way. So we're going to start off talking about why battery bank sizing matters, and it's really there's 2 different problems when it comes to sizing your battery bank. You can either undersize the battery bank, and if you undersize your battery bank, then you're basically going to be trying to avoid things that you need. This is very annoying. You think when you do your original sizing, you're not truly being honest with yourself. You're like, well, I can live without this and I can live without that. And then when you get into the situation where it's not just for an hour, it's not a perceived I can live without this or I perceived I can live without that, it becomes a real issue. So I urge you, when you're estimating the size of your battery bank, that you use some legitimate honesty with yourself on what you really need. It could also lead to low performance, meaning that it's going to appear to perform lower because you're avoiding the things that you really truly do need. You're not using everything that you should be using, or you could be using. Let me put it that way. Should be is kind of a harsh word when it comes to solar. And then obviously it can also lead to your batteries being dead, and then you're lost without power, and then the whole point of having the solar system is kind of been defeated. So that's really the extreme size of undersizing. Now, believe it or not, oversizing has some side effects also. Some of those side effects include um, the wasted money. In other words, if I only need 30 kilowatt hours of battery power and I have 200 kilowatt hours of battery power, there is going to be a tremendous amount of batteries sitting around doing nothing all the time for years and years and years and years. short of me shutting the solar panels off, if I'm using 30 kilowatts and that can last me for days and days and days, then theoretically I could go for 2 weeks without having any solar power, turn the solar power back on, and still be back into things. So it does seem like an extreme, but it is definitely a possibility. So you want to try to not undersize it too much, but not oversize it too much either. Now, if I have a preference, oversizing is my preference. I would prefer to always be oversized. You'll see battery manufacturers take this motto also. And this one is partially selfishness on their part, but also it's perception of value. So, for example, if they tell you to buy a 100 amp hour battery and you run right down to 100 amp hours every single night, then that one night when you need something extra, you can't do it. But if they tell you, hey, build yourself a buffer, let's say 20%, and you only run at 80% depth of discharge, well, then that one night when you need something, it's there. And then your opinion of their quality of their product is brought up in your mind, because when you needed it, it was there. And there's nothing that's wrong that they did on their side other than set expectations. And so that's why a lot of them will tell you to do 80% depth of discharge other than life of battery. And so that unused capacity leads to oversizing. And so you can see that there is advantages and disadvantages to both. So if we can we switch? So some real examples of this, and I want to point out this is something that I covered in a video, and I think it's been a couple months now, but I covered in a video about weekend campers with small fridges is completely different than you run off grid and you need a fridge 24/7 every day all the time. Because a weekend camper, and what I mean by that is your measurement, the way you measure things on the weekend type camper is different, in the sense that if you're a weekend camper, then you are basically going out during the day and hiking with your dog. You're not sitting in your RV, running your air conditioner, running your fans, running this and running that. You're not opening and closing your refrigerator nonstop and constantly to get a drink out, to do this. You're out and about. So the consumption for someone who is out and about on a constant basis like that is completely different from a weekend camper that goes out to go to the state park and saying how much battery power I need. And I want to make sure that if you're doing calculations on what it's going to take to build those calculations, you need to take into account the lifestyle that you want to live in those situations or are living in those situations. For me here in my RV, I have 31 kilowatt hours of battery power. I've got 3,700 watts of power on the roof, and I've got another 3,000 watts on the solar shed. Now, the solar shed doesn't produce as well as the 3,000 on the roof, given that they're used panels as opposed to the new bifacials that are on the RV. But at the same time, it is the fact is that I based my usage of that battery and those panels off of living full time in an RV, not going camping and spending all of my time out eating out for dinner and stuff like that. I have to cook for dinner. So those type of things you need to take into account. If you're going to be in a full-time off-grid setup, then you need to plan that all of those little things that you take for granted have to be included. You don't want to skip out on them, because it's one thing to live without something for a week or two on solar, and it is completely different. And you can ask my wife to live without them forever. Take, for example, and I give you a perfect example in my RV, 9 times out of 10, I can run the hot water heater all the time, no problem. I flip the electricity on and I don't have to worry about it. Now, there are 2 times during the year, in the heat of the summer when I use excessive air conditioning, that I don't simply have enough power to run the hot water heater 24/7, just so that the on-demand hot water is there, or in the dead of the winter, in the December and January months where the sun is not got quite high enough in the skies to give me enough power. So if you're running an off-grid setup, truly off-grid, then you need to take those type of things into account. That is living without hot water sometimes acceptable? For me, most of the time it is. I can flip on the gas and get the gas to make up the difference. For my wife, it's a completely different story. She wants hot water when she wants it. She doesn't want to have to plan ahead. Now, she's done pretty good at doing so and learned to do so, but that's what I mean by there are differences in the way that you use solar based on how your life is at that time and what you're doing. Last one is the power, emergency power for a house. I lived this one for real last year in a hurricane. And I'll tell you, there is nothing like living through a hurricane's emergency power. And a lot of people think, well, I've got a generator and everything's going to be okay and fine. But they don't realize the effort that goes into of maintaining a generator during a power outage at the hurricane after a hurricane, finding gas so that you can keep the generator running, making sure that it runs 24/7 so that you have power all day and all night. And then they don't ever consider the fact that the cell towers, the cable companies, the all the network, the city pumps, all of that stuff runs on grid power. So not only do you lose your electricity to have your TV, but your TV wouldn't work even if you did have power in most cases because you don't have electricity for the cable company. You don't have a cable modem because even though you can power it, the cable company can't power the box that's in wherever their equipment shed is. So these type of things a lot of people don't think about, that you have to think about the essentials. So I'm hoping that's clear and that you understand it. And I don't want to spend too much time on it because this is Tips Tuesday, and we try not to make this one extraordinarily long like some of the other live streams I did. I did 3 hours this weekend doing State of Charge, and I tell you, it was a fantastic show. If you've missed it, you should go back and watch it. It was really a great number of questions handled in great detail. Quick tip to remember, and this is something that I learned having a coffee trailer and living completely with a coffee trailer solar system last year, that a deep freezer and a small home refrigerator uses around 1.2 to 1.4 kilowatt hours of energy daily. And what I mean by that is if you were to buy a little kilowatt device, and you plug a refrigerator or a freezer in and you let it run for a 24-hour period, I've found that most of them run at about 1.2 kilowatt hours of energy a day. It's a good rule of thumb that if you are looking to build a system that can handle a freezer, which in most cases what people do. I learned through the hurricane last year a little trick is to not necessarily keep a refrigerator, but keep a big deep freeze with lots of ice. And the reason I do that is because with the ice, you can basically keep a refrigerator for practically ever. But if you don't have ice, then you have to keep the refrigeration running constantly. The deep freezes are much, much more low consumption use. They last a lot longer. And even if they come unplugged or they run out of energy in the middle of the night and then they have to start up the next day, most of the time they can last that 3, 4, 5, 6 hours without any power and still come out in a freezing temperature because they're going down to sub-zero degrees of -30 in a freezer. And when you have ice that's at -30, you can actually dump that ice into an ice bucket and it frees water in the ice bucket as opposed to the ice starting to melt. So that's an important distinction and a nice tip to remember. And it's a good rule of thumb. 1.2, 1.3 kilowatt hours you can usually count on for those devices. So how do you estimate the needs that you have? And the reason for the tip was it kind of gives us a really good basis for doing some math here. And hopefully I've got my phone close by because I don't want to do it live off of my head. But it basically comes down to your watt hours divided by voltage. And that's going to tell you what size battery you need to run exactly what you have there. Now, keep in mind, we talked about earlier when we first started building that buffer in. So make sure you're building in a buffer for a couple of things. I put a list of those items down here. Inverter size. So inverters, most of them have some kind of idle consumption. And that may only be 10 or 12 watts, but 10 or 12 watts can add up over a 24-hour period to an amount of usage that you're not willing to lose or wouldn't want to go without accounting for. Solar input. Basically, when it comes to solar input, depending on the number of solar panels, could determine how quickly you can recover. If you can, in a typical day, recover in one day the entire charge of your battery, that's wonderful. But what happens when it rains? What happens when you have clouds? What happens when you don't have a full day? What happens when you park under some trees and you don't have that exposure like that? So you need to take that into account. And also backup needs. And I put on here 2 to 5 days. I have found that most people's consumption, you can uh, you can recover in a 2 to 5 day gap pretty well. And let me tell you what that means. So if I use 25 kilowatt hours of power a day and I have a 30 kilowatt battery, that means that I have just barely over 1 day of power. So I'm going to assume for this example, and I'm talking about the actual RV here, that in most cases I'm going to get some solar power even if it's raining. Now it may only be 5 or 10 kilowatts, but I take the 5 that I had left over and I add, let's say 10 from that, I end up with 15. Now I know that I can also cut consumption on my daily uses. I can turn off the hot water heater. I can use gas instead. I can use a few less lights. There's air conditioners. If it's raining and it's not hot, I know the air conditioners are going to use considerably less. So my consumption may drop from a typical 25 kilowatts a day down to 15. And there, I've automatically gone to extended that to a 2 day. But so this is the kind of the calculation that you really want to think about. Most people in a full off-grid situation, if you want to truly be safe, you need to have 2 to 3 days backup, 2 to 5 days backup. And it really depends on what you prefer as that backup and how you want to manage it. In the RV here, I went from having where I was using about 15 kilowatts a day in a normal month, not summer. Summer I use about 25. In a normal month I use about 15. And I went from having my 3 EG4 batteries and using exactly that every day and using solar to charge it back up, and then it would make it to the next day. And it worked just fine until it rains. And then it doesn't work anymore, because then that one day where it rains, I make it through the day, but the next night I run out of energy before I can get to the next day. Now, when I added the DIY battery, which you saw the video about that releasing earlier this week, that increased me from 15 kilowatts to 31 kilowatts. And that allows me to have that day or two of rain and then still have time to recover and charge the batteries up and build that little buffer in. That made all the difference in the world. That little extra, even though it isn't a full 2 or 3 or 4 days of extra, it is enough now that I can fully safely say that I went off grid for 3 months until I got here in June, and in June, where the temperatures were just hot and the air conditioners were running too much, I just simply couldn't. And also contributing factors, I did a lot of battery testing this month, and I disconnected panels for testing things and stuff like that. So some of that has effect on it also. So that, just keep in mind all of those things. But if you take the watt hours, and let's say that you have a freezer, like we talked about, it's 1.2 kilowatts, which is 1,200 watt hours. And let's say that you're using a 12-volt battery, then 1,200 divided by 12 is 100 amp hours is needed to run that battery all day long. Now, if you watch the videos that I have based on the coffee trailer where I have a freezer hooked up, it runs it down to about 50 to 60% every day and then charges it back up. And that is because as soon as the solar panels start to charge in the morning, it never brings the battery down past that point, and then it extends the life all the way till the sun comes down. So the timer starts at the end of the day and it ends at the beginning of the day, and all the day in the middle is absorbed by the solar panels themselves. So that in essence gives me 2 days on a 100 amp hour battery, with a little bit of buffer. And to be honest with you, I've never had my freezer shut off there. So these are the kind of things that you need to take into account: the idle consumption, the recovery speed, the panels that you have, and the backup needs. And do a little bit of the math and come up with the answers there. I hope this makes the subject clear and gives you a clear way to calculate it. And if you have a different voltage battery, for example, if you have that 1200, same 1200 watt hours that you're using for that freezer, and you're running a 24-volt battery, then that would be 1200 divided by 24, which would make it 50 amp hours in a day. And if you're running a 48-volt system, then it would make that even half of that. So it would be 25 amp hours. And so this is the kind of this shows you the kind of calculation you need to come up with that answer. Now, um, let's talk about some of the common mistakes that are made here. We rely only on battery capacity without factoring discharge depth. And what I mean by that is the what we originally talked about. If you need 100 amp hours and you leave absolutely no room for mistakes in there, some days are going to be a little bit more and some days are going to be a little bit less. And if you decide you want to turn on a computer or a TV a little early, and also keep in mind, when you're doing these calculations, if it's raining, your day isn't normal. And that means that your calculations may be different. So in my case, my air conditioner usage goes down dramatically. So instead, I go from a standard usage of 25 amps a day, or 25 kilowatt hours of energy a day, down to 15, just like that, when I lose my air conditioners. Because it's cooler outside, I don't need them. At the same time, I'm also not outside as much. I'm going to be inside a lot more, and I'm going to be watching more TV, or I'm going to be working on my computer, or I'm going to be doing other items. Usually I do unboxing events during those. So that means I'm going to be filming and have lots of lights and lots of cameras and stuff. So there is usually, the one thing to remember is the usage is different when your power is out than when it's on. And that's one of the very common things is everyone says, well, I need 100 amp hours, and they've based it off of the normal day, not off of a rainy day. In a lot of cases, if you live in a family of 5 or something, you may have, extra showers because everyone's at home and they've all decided, they're going to do the shower, they're going to do laundry, or they're going to do this, or they're going to do that. Those are the type of things you need to consider. What happens on a rainy day, and how is that different from a regular day? And then leave yourself some margin. So leaving a margin for cloudy days, I think we talked about, and this is the 2 to 5 day rule. My suggestion is that you should somewhere between 2.5 and 3 is just a magnificent difference in how your life can change and how things can happen. I went from using gas only when I really needed it to having my hot water heater on all 24/7 every day of the month except 2 months of the year. In December, half of December and half of January, and half in June that just passed us, and probably maybe a little bit here in July because it is still very, very hot. But um, not balancing or the charge rate of the battery size. And I did a series on battery balancing, state of charge this weekend, and not knowing how your batteries actually perform in this, most people are in for a real surprise. They don't realize that their state of charge isn't what it says. And anyone who has an EV has gone through this where you're driving down the road and you're in and your battery starts to get under 10% and you start thinking, well, is there really 10% still in there or not? Imagine this when it's your entire house, it's your lights, it's your home, it's your heater, it's your air conditioner, it's your kids taking a bath, it's everything. So this is something that one of the big mistakes is not balancing your batteries to where you have that full performance of your batteries, and not knowing that that state of charge when you get to the bottom is accurate, and when you're at the top is accurate. I know for a fact if I turn all of my solar off right now, that my batteries will be functioning at 1%. I know. I test it on a regular basis. I constantly, especially here in the summer right now, I run there on that edge, up and down, and sometimes I go for 10 or 12 days without needing grid. And then sometimes I need it 2 or 3 days in a row. Usually what I do is it automatically comes on and it charges up a little bit, enough to get me through the night and get back into the solar. And then I just go back onto solar again. So but that's that. So Not balancing charging the rates of the battery and with battery size. Uh, Also, not getting a sufficient solar panel size to recharge your battery. So if you've got 100 amp hours of battery, my rule of thumb isn't that I can recharge them all in 24-hour period. A lot of people have that policy, but it leads to a lot of panels, and a lot of panels some people just simply don't have room for. um, I know that I don't have room for it here in my RV. Being in a park, they were nice enough to allow me to have a shed, so I was very fortunate with that. So that's very helpful. But the what I like to do is say that, look, on a typical day, if I have a good day of sun, and I don't mean a awesome day, I mean a typical day, that I should be able to increase the battery's charge from day to day about 10 to 15, possibly 20%. That means that if I end today at midnight, let's say, and my batteries are at 78%, that if I have a good day tomorrow, they should be between 88 and 93% the next night. And that would mean that the third day I would get fully charged. If I end the day and the batteries are at 45%, which is a very good possibility today, then tomorrow, if I have a good day of sun, they should be at 55 or 60%. And the next day, they should be at 65. And the next day at 75. So I gradually build up to accommodate those rain or snow days. Now, if I have enough room to pile on an extra row of panels or put a rack mount out in the back of a yard or out in the middle of a field, then great, do so. But not all of us have that. So you need to make sure you're accommodating how many panels you need to accommodate that power, and then also understand that the option of using a generator is different when it comes to solar than it is to use it for full off time. If you're in the case of a hurricane and you run out of power and you start that generator, every time you want to put gas in the motor, you want to do maintenance, you want to check the oil, you have to turn that generator off in order to stay safe. And you have to let it cool off if you're going to change the oil, and so on and so forth. So there's all this time when you have no power. But when you are running on a solar system, not only does that generator only run at a very limited amount of time, it can run at its peak performance right around 80% output and just pump that energy into the battery and allow you to run it for an hour or two instead of running it 24 hours a day. So even in the worst scenarios, I still have a generator. If I'm traveling long distance, then I have a Harbor Freight Predator noisy 7,200 watt generator that I can pump to my charge inverter with that dirty energy and don't worry about it. It cost me, I think, $600. If I'm going to be out in a long term for a while, I also have a 9200 for the food trailer, which is an inverter. I can plug it directly into the grid and use it that way. And then I've also got a small Champion 2000 water that I can use for basically just if I'm going to be like at every year I go up to the Mohican Sun up in Connecticut and spend a week or two in the parking lot there. And if I spend a week or two in the parking lot, I don't want some big generator. I just want something small, but I can start that little thing. It can run for 2 or 3 hours and compensate for any downsides that I have. So far, I've brought it with me and it's been a waste of time. I haven't needed it. The sun's really good there. So where was I at? The not balancing batteries or testing performance in their system until it's too late. This is extremely key. This is probably one of the biggest mistakes made when you're sizing your battery bank is that you're not testing it. So you get to the end and your battery bank is 10, 15, 20% smaller than you think it is. I know when I first hooked up my 6000 XP, I have my EG4 batteries. I have 15 kilowatts. And the first time I got an opportunity to use them, at 18%, everything went woo and shut down. 18%. Now, that's nobody's fault but my own. I should have known that the batteries needed to be tested before I needed them. And, I'm thinking, oh, there's a big storm coming tomorrow. The power might go out. Yeah, no big deal. I got batteries. I can do this, blah, blah, blah. And what I should have been doing is saying, well, when will they conk out? Didn't know at that time. So, uh, make sure that you're testing this. And the easiest way to test this is just Pick a day and shut the solar off completely. Let the battery, let it run until it shuts down and test it. Whether it's automatically kicking on the grid, whether it's automatically turning on a generator, whether it's shutting down at a certain point. Make sure that you understand how it's going to work. Perfect example of this is the video we did, the 24-volt system battery that I released earlier this week. On that lead time battery that I released, I put it on a solar system and I plugged it in and I ran it down with a charge inverter down to nothing, and it shut down. And I actually had to give a little trickle charge, and then I did it again, and the next morning I let the solar system turn it back on automatically. And that's because I need to understand if it was in my food trailer and my freezer was dependent upon it and it went out at 4 in the morning, would it come back on in the next morning? Can I not worry about whether or not it's going to come on or not? Or do I need to worry about it? Fortunately, everything worked the way it was supposed to. The sun came up the next morning, solar power started coming in, a little bit of a trickle charge hit the battery, it turned back on everything that it was supposed to turn back on, and then it started taking a charge. The inverter kicked back on, the freezer started running, and everything turned out okay. But those are the type of things that you don't know until you try them, and you don't know how much that battery it is. I explained it this way this weekend, and I want to do it again today because I thought it was really important then. When you're talking about battery energy, the state of charge is based on a calculation that is affected by the butterfly effect, meaning that if I give you a 5-gallon jug and I hand you a 16-ounce glass of water and ask you to put it in that jug, and then 3 days later I ask you how much water is in that jug, you're going to be able to tell me how much water is in that jug most of the time. You won't be able to account for evaporation if there's a small leak in the valve where I'm also taking water out and getting a drink every day. So this state of charge is a constantly changing thing, and you need a way to reset it. And most batteries are reset by top balancing, meaning you charge them all the way to the top and you call it full, or you drop them all the way to the bottom and you start off with empty and then you fill it back up and then you know how much went in there. For me, I like a combination of the two, but you'll have to go back and watch that video if you want a little bit more information on it. I don't want to spend too much time on that here today. Okay, um, let's look at that's. Oh, that's actually the last slide. I do have a couple of questions that came in through email on this that spawned this video off. I think there's only 4 or 5 of them, so I'm going to go through those real quick. I'm going to see if I can put this on an empty screen here, and then we will go to questions. Let me see how I get those on. I think I can do that here. Yes, I can. Good. All right, so give me just a second to get the questions started. Can't find the questions. I know they're here somewhere. All right. Oh, here they are. Okay. So email questions. I need to. Oh, what am I doing? There we go. All right. Found them. All right. So for questions, I have Mike T from Arizona who asked, who do I figure out how? How do I figure out the right battery size if I only use solar on the weekends? And this is actually a really good question because this goes back to one of the points that I made early on, and probably why I put the point into the thing, is that you need to gauge what usage you have in a real environment that's based on what you're really doing, and don't just estimate a whole bunch of stuff. And that means if you're only using the solar on the weekend, go out and gauge the whole weekend in a real environment. Put a kilowatt meter on the RV or something to measure how much it is. Do the real calculations for a real environment of that time, and then build your buffers based on that. You can go in, and a lot of energy audits allow you to go in, and you can buy it, you can download off the internet somewhere an energy audit where you list all the devices and estimate all the calculations and stuff like that. But it's much more accurate to just measure the actual usage, especially if you are at an RV park or something like that. Most of them are metered, and you can see exactly how much power you're using. Or if you already have an existing solar system, and you're using grid to charge that, then you could also do it that way. My suggestion is that you find a way to measure the actual circumstances there. I have a video that I'll link here. No, I can't link it here. This is live stream. Sorry. I do have a video that I released back a few weeks ago that talks about a 50 amp um, plug for an RV park that you can use to measure. I've also, you can buy a kilowatt, which is 110, and I'll put a link in the description down below for that one also. I'll put both of them down there. So if you're watching it on a replay, at least you'll have it then. And if you're watching it live, then you can come back and take a look at it then. I'll have those links here in the next few hours. Next question that I got was Sarah J asked, is there such a thing as too much battery bank for small solar system? And you know, the joke in the solar world is that you can always use another battery. And I think that's actually true, but if you look at the presentation that I gave, the very first slide really kind of contradicts that. You can get excessively too big, but batteries are very expensive, so that's not an easy thing to do. If you need 100 amp hours and you've got 10,000 amp hours, that's a different thing. My experience with this has been the more battery space you get, the more ways you find to use it and use less grid. In other words, the more normal of a life you get to live, and you get to learn the things that you're doing to get out of trying to live on a solar system and live within the bounds of it. You're expanding those bounds to where you're getting to the point where you live normal. Here in my RV, I live 100% normal, except that stupid hot water heater. And that I hope to change at some point here in the near future. But that's life. That's how it is with the solar system. There's a constant balance of how big is too big versus what is practical cost-wise. If money is of no object, then no, you can't have enough power. You can't have enough battery storage for anything. I would love to have enough power to run for a month without having to plug in. It would be nice to be able to take the solar panels down, remount them all, spend a couple weeks doing it, make a whole bunch of cool videos about it, and then turn them back on and still have enough battery power to support it. Can't do that today, but it would be cool. Next question is, Daniel W. from Ohio asked, how much of a safety margin should I add to my battery bank sizing? I would put about 20% on there, but I've seen people go as much as 100%. This is really based on your preference, and where you live can change that too. Here in Florida, for the most part, I don't really get consecutive bad days. Now, if I was living in someplace in the Northwest, then I may consider having a much larger buffer in there instead of going with my normal 20, 30, 40, 50% or 2 days or 3 days of cloud availability. I may want to go with 5 or 6 or 7 days of cloud availability. So a lot of that's going to depend on where you live, what you're comfortable with, and what you want to have as a buffer bank. My suggestion is you start at about 20%, and then you can always build on it if you need more than that. All right. Coming to the end of questions here. So if anyone online has any, please put them in the chat. I'll make sure I cover them before I go. Otherwise, I don't want to leave and leave you all hanging with no answers. Oops, skipped one there. Jess P wants to know, do I size the battery based on my inverter or based on my daily usage? I think the question here is a loaded question. In other words, I think Jess is thinking that they are going to use all the inverter power, therefore should they size it based on that, or are they going to size it based on what they actually use the power for? My suggestion is you go ahead and do it if it's not financially infeasible, to do it based on the inverter, and then you can use whatever power you want. You don't have to worry about it. At the same time, a lot of the times the reason you have the equipment you have is because of the financial investment in getting that equipment. So it's not necessary to do it that way, but that would be the way that I would do it. And as you can see, a lot of this is really preferences. 5, Chris M in the chat asked, Can I mix different sizes of brands of Life Power 4 batteries if I'm short on budget? The answer to this is very loaded. The manufacturers are going to tell you that you can't do it. There are a ton of videos, including my own, that prove that you can do this. But there are some restrictions. One, it needs to be of the same chemistry as the batteries that you're mixing. In other words, they need to all be Life Power 4 lithium iron phosphate batteries, and they need to be all of the same size. And what I mean by size is if it's a 4-cell, an 8-cell, or a 16-cell, and specifically I'm talking about the 48-volt batteries, a 16-cell 48-volt battery as opposed to a 15-cell 48-volt battery. Those two batteries are not equal, so you need to make sure that they're the same size, that nature. I've also proven that if you have a 100 amp hour battery and a 300 amp hour battery, you can run them in conjunction together. Also, the batteries drain. I do that in the RV. I have 300 amp hour EG4 Life Power batteries, and I have one DIY 103 amp hour battery, and I use them both together. The 300 amp hour battery gives about half the power, and the 300 amp hour batteries give about half the power together. So each one of them gives about a sixth, and the big one gives about half. So it does work, no problem. But stick with the same chemistry, stick with the same cell count size batteries. Tina, I wonder how many questions I have. I thought I only had 5. Tina R says, what more important to size correctly, solar panels or the battery bank? They're both equally important. If you don't have enough solar panels, you can't charge the battery bank, and the battery bank does you no good. If you are essentially buying a bigger battery bank and you know that the solar panels are all you need to live from day to day, then the solar panels are the important part, because you don't need all that extra power and you can take the time to slowly charge them over time, which is what I do. But if you need all the power in the battery bank in order to make it a day or two, just understand if you don't have enough solar panels to recover them, if you do have 2 or 3 or 4 days in a row, you're not going to make it. So they are a joint pair. They form a symbiotic relationship, just like the Force. No, they work together. And if you don't have enough ability to charge, you won't have the ability to use. And if you use and you don't have the ability to charge, then you can't replace, and then you're going to run out of power. So they do work together. But if you have more than enough battery power and you only have enough solar panels, then you should be okay. And then looking at question number 7, JB from Texas asked, how do cloudy days affect our battery size that is needed? So this is exactly the same thing that we've been going over here. I think I've already answered it, but I'll briefly cover it. My suggestion is that you build in a 2 to 5 day buffer, depending on where you live. Here in Florida, I would think that probably 2.5 to 3 days of buffer. In other words, if I need 100 amp hours, that I should have 300 amp hours. If I need 10 kilowatts, then I should have 30 kilowatts. I'm a little bit undersized, but I'm also an RV. I wouldn't expect that an RV would need that much. But if I'm talking about running an off-grid freezer for a disaster, then I would. If I'm talking about running an off-grid house or a cabin, then I definitely would. So a lot of it depends on your backup options. A lot of people have generators that they can use to charge, and they use it as a backup option, and so that's not a big deal. Okay, hopefully that answers that question. Then we have Rob K wants to know, if I want 2 days of backup power, how do I, can't see that. Oh, how much bigger does my battery need to be? Okay, so let's use the 2.5, let's use the 3-day rule as an example for this. And let's suppose that that Rob, that you need 10 kilowatt of energy in order to operate for a single day. And that means that if you had no solar panels, no grid, no nothing, and you had 10 kilowatts of battery, and at midnight you started using it, and the next day at midnight you would run out. That means that you need 10 kilowatts in a single day to operate. Now, in that scenario, I would suggest that you would need 3 times that to operate. Now, the good news about having 3 times, meaning you want 30 kilowatts hours of battery energy. The good news about that is that during the day when your solar panels are charging, and you would be able to replenish that, then you would need enough to replenish that 10 kilowatts a day. Now, 10 kilowatts a day in solar panels would equate to how you would need to calculate how many panels you would need to do that. But at that point, you would know you need 30 kilowatts of battery and an ability to replace that power each day. I think that was how I wanted to answer that. I want to make sure I reread that one just to make sure. If I want 2 days of backup power, how much bigger does the battery need to be? And that I would use it based on non-usage. Midnight to midnight, how much power usage, or any 24-hour period is pretty much, how much power usage do I have? If it's in a house, you can go out, read the meter, find out how much it is. If it's in an RV park, you can build most of them either have a meter, or you can build one of the 50 amperes or a 30 ampere like I did in a previous video, and then you can get that actual measurement. Make it 3 times that, and you should be safe in most cases. If you live in a very, very sunny place where you get weather that rains for days and days and days, and 4 and 5 and 6 days at a time, then you may want to increase that, keeping in mind that you're not going to use all of that, because you are going to have solar. Even in shady days, you still have some solar input. It may be 10 to 20% of its normal production, but you will have some solar input even on the worst days. All right. We got number 9 from Brenda L. says, what's the most common mistake people make when sizing their battery bank? The most common that I have seen is, and you will hear, probably said it yourself. Well, I really don't need hot water all the time. I can just turn it off and turn it on when I need it. Or, you know, I yeah, I like having my coffee warm in the morning, but I can just brew it and then shut it off and drink and warm it up some other way, or just drink it while it's hot. They Those items where they're anticipating that they can live with things that they really don't want to live with. And I don't mean they can't. I mean they don't want to. And it's one thing to do that when you go camping. Just like when you go camping, it's okay to sleep in a sleeping bag overnight for a day or two when you're out in the middle of the woods. But if I ask you, what do you need to survive long term? You wouldn't say, I need a sleeping bag. You would want to have some place to actually sleep that's comfortable. Same thing's true with your energy. You don't want have the to have to always worry about hot water if it's on or if it's off. You don't want to worry about your stupid coffee in the morning. Simple little things like that take energy and you don't even think about them. You flip the coffee on in the morning, you make a cup of coffee, you shut it off. Well, my wife sets hers to go off at 7 a.m. in the morning. Now, whether she gets up at 7 or 8:30, it doesn't matter. When she gets up, the coffee's ready, and it will run until she either turns it off or it automatically shuts off 3 hours later. So the coffee pot is going to be there and it's going to be on. Those are the little things that people think they can live without. And the absolute most common mistake they make is they don't think about those when they're doing this. They don't plan them in. They're like, oh, well, how long does it take to make a pot of coffee? And they plug in a coffee pot and they brew the pot of coffee and they take out their kilowatt and they look at it and they go, oh, it took, 100 amp hours to make a pot of coffee, however many it is. It took, 5 amp hours to make this pot of coffee. Great, 5. That's what I need every day for coffee. But that means that they're making their coffee, they're shutting it off, and they have none of those benefits that come with normal life. And that's what most people don't take into account. They don't take into account normal life things that you just do all the time, and it always haunts them. Um, Number 10, Tom S. from Florida asks, another Floridian, how do I future-proof my battery bank in case I expand my system later? Lithium iron phosphate batteries have a life expectancy of a very long time. Now, let me define long time. I've had the batteries in my RV right now for um, over a year, a little over a year. And what I'm doing is I'm going and pulling up some statistics for you. And I just want to get the screen ready before I flip it to show it to you. And the fact is that the batteries are going to live a very long time. Testing. Nope. This one. Here we go. Okay. So as you can see, let's flip this screen here. Hopefully this works. So you can see from here, I've got the cycles on my battery, and I just want to make sure that's actually showing up correctly, and it is. You can see here, I've got cycles on my battery at 225, 220, and 211. Now, that is for about 370 days, meaning that an annual cycle of my batteries is going to cost me 220 cycles of its life. Now, if I pull up a calculator and I say that, the batteries coming out today have 7,000 cycles of life, is what they're claiming. And let's just say that they're wrong. Let's say that it's 5,000 cycles of life, and I run 24 hours, 7 days a week, all day. Sometimes I go for months without being fully charged. Sometimes I hit the grid 2 or 3 times a week. But cycles 225 is very, very typical on good heavy usage. So I got 500 cycles that they're going to give me. And if I take that and I divide that by the 225 that battery is showing, that means this battery is going to live for 22 years at full use every day. It's inconceivable that if you look at electric usage over the last 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, there been nothing but increases the entire time. Homes that were installed with 100 amp panels are now being replaced with 200 amp panels constantly because power usage is always going to go up. It's like home values. They're always going to go up, almost always. So the same thing's true for your battery bank. I see this as these batteries get older, newer, bigger ones are going to come out. Proof of this, they came out with a 560 amp hour cell in the last couple of months. Now, a year ago, 100 amp hour cells were cool, and then the 280 amp hour cells, and then the 310 amp hour cells, and then the 360 amp hour cells, and now they got 560 amp battery cells. That means that one battery, one 48 volt battery, can basically, I'm going to take the calculator here again, at 560 amp hours times 52.3 volts is 29 kilowatt hours in one battery. This is it's so the idea that you're not going to add power later, which is why when in the very beginning of this video I said you absolutely can use the you can use multiple size batteries as long as they're the same chemistry. 16 cell 48 volt batteries, 8 cell 24 volt batteries, and 4 cell 12 volt batteries, as long as they're the same chemistry, lithium iron phosphate, and they're the same cell, the number of cells in them, then you can easily add them between each one to your system with no consequences. And they work just fine. And I think that is the end of my questions, which it is. So I just want to remind everybody that this weekend's live stream is going to be about hurricanes and emergency modes and a lot more. This is just a precursor to that. It's battery week. I've got tons of battery videos out. Please feel free to do them. And if you're interested in additional content or getting a little early access to things, you can also subscribe to the channel. And I truly thank all of my subscribers this morning. We were in excess of 7,000. We've been growing about 1,000 a week. It is just fantastic. Thank you so much, all of you. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed already, make sure you do. More battery videos coming out this week. And then next week, we're going to start a whole new subject, and it's going to be really fun. So talk to you later. You guys have a good one. And Stay safe.